Hey team, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at how to use SqlBulkCopy. I hope you enjoy this video. The source code for this video is located at github.com/softwarenuggets/SqlBulkCopy. Download that and walk along with me for this video. So notice here we have three files. We have program.cs, process.cs, and basic data structure.cs. So three files. Let's begin with main. Now with our main, it starts off with main, and then we're going to declare a class called process. So we'll say var process equals new process. And then pro.load file. Then our temporary file name will be called product_work. Now let me explain this, what we're going to be doing here. So I'm going to be loading data through what's known as SqlBulkCopy. And I don't want to put that into a production table. What I do is I build a work table, and then we use this work table, and then from that work table, we'll populate our database appropriately. So guess what, team? This is our first file and it's all done. That's the program file. Now let's go look at the database. These are all the SQL statements we're going to need. And because this is a work table, that means it's very disposable. I have a truncate it, remove all the data. A drop the table, that means completely remove it from the database. I'm going to create a data table called product work, and then I'm going to select the number of rows that we're going to do an insert. It's important to remember before we use SqlBulkCopy, our table must exist in our SQL database. So let's execute lines 8 to 13 and let's create that table. Now we're going to look at the process. Remember in program we said var process, new process, and then load file. This is our temporary work table. That's load file. Inside of load file, we're also going to connect to our database and then build a connection string. Let's begin with this connection string. So what we'll say is System.Text.stringBuilder. And then we're going to call it sconnect, that's the name of our variable, equals new string builder. And there is our variable. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to build the SQL statement connection string, kind of like one attribute at a time. So sconnect.append. Now our first one that we're going to put in there is called a data source. And that is a space in between data and source and then equal. And then pretty much that's our first one. Now we're going to be needing 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to be needing 5 of these with its value. So what we can do is we can copy this down 5 times. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now our next attribute is going to be called database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say semicolon database. Then our next one will be called user ID. Then our next one is going to be password. And then our next one is going to be connection timeout. Now this is going to be a real long one because it has some additional properties to keep things open. Okay, so this right here is just the basic format of the connection string builder. So this is everything that we're going to put in here should be private. Now, a lot of times I might put that in your web config file, but here I'm just going to keep this app as focused as possible so we can learn how to do the bulk loading. So here's my database. What I can do is right click and come down to properties, and then notice it says product name. I'm going to highlight that and I'm going to grab that value out of there. And then that is going to be my data source. Now, because I have a slash in there, a slash is a reserved character. So I'm going to add another slash and say, I wanted the slash. Back here, our database is GOV. So our username is going to be software, and our password is nuggets, and our timeout was 15. Remember, I told you that there was quite a few values that went in this last one to keep things running. And let me give those to you now. So you have connection timeout 15, connection lifetime 0, min pull size, that will be 0. We're going to close this out now. And then we have max pull size is 100 and pulling true. So this just tells our database connection how to behave once it's connected. Now that we have this connection string built, we have to return that. And remember, this is a string builder, so we have to say return sConnection.toString. And the build connection string is all done. Now we're going to write the dbConnect method. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the value from this build connection string. So we say string connection string equals build, and then we're going to say if connection string equals null, return null. Then var dbCon equals new SQL connection, dbCon dot connection string equals connection string, dbCon dot open, and then return dbCon. So that is how we're going to connect to our database. So we're going to come down here and get this connection string that we just built. Now, if this returns an empty string, a null, then I'm just going to get out of here. I'm going to declare a new variable of type SQL connection. I'm then going to take that connection string and apply it to that connection.connection string. I'm then going to attempt to open it, and then I'm going to return that connection string to whoever is calling this. Pretty easy, yeah? Now we're going to come back to load file because this is going to use some methods that we're going to write in basic data structure. So notice the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a table. Notice using system and using System.Data. So what we're going to say here is DataTable, new product, equals new DataTable. And then notice I have an input parameter here called table name, and let's use that. So I'm going to say table name. Then I'm going to write another method in here. Notice this is called add columns to a data table. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to send in this object I just created called new products. And once we're done with that, we need to go down here and write this add columns. So we're going to be using 3 columns, product ID, product short description, and a product UPC. So we have an integer and then 2 varchars. And notice one is 64 bytes and the other one is 20. And all of these are not null. That means all of these are required, and product ID is the primary key. So here we go, how to create a column. So the first thing we're going to do is use the data type data column. Now data column product ID equals new data column, and then our product ID dot column name equals product ID. The second one is we want to get our data type, so product ID dot data type equals system.type.getType, and then you just give it the system.intID 32. And after we get that done, remember back on our table here we said that this is not null and it's the primary key. Well, because we're going to be using this column as our primary key, let's also make this unique. So what we need to do is say product type dot allow DB nulls is false, and product type dot unique is true. Now once we get all of our columns attributes set up, we then need to add this back to our object here. So what we say is new product dot add column add, and then what is it? It's going to be called product ID. And that's one down, a couple to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, so I'll have to do this again, and Control C this, and let's rename this. So the next column is going to be called C2. Now we can call this whatever we want. We're just going to be trying to get it all loaded up. Now our next column will be called product short description. And product short description is actually going to be a string, so that's system string. Now what we have to do is for allow nulls and unique. Think about that for a minute. Do we need that? Well, we need allow nulls. We want false, but we don't want that to be unique. Now, what we also need to do is say c2.maxLength equals 64. So product short description, remember we came up there and said that's a varchar 64. And remember, when we were looking at our table of product work, the column product short description, notice it's n varchar 64. That is the same data type that we're going to need to find in our C# code, 64. It is a type string product short description. And now we're going to be looking at our last column. I'm just going to harvest all this data, put it down there and turn these into threes. And the name of our column was product UPC, and its data type is string, and its length is going to be 20. And do we want it to allow nulls? No, we wanted that to be false. So 3 threes and add 3. And at the very bottom, we just want to return new products. That is a data table. So return new products. And notice to our input parameters, we passed an object to our add columns. So this is kind of like by reference. So this one will get updated. Now that we've added all our columns to the table, we are now finished putting that together. Now we need to do one more step. Remember, we wanted to have a primary key. So how do we do that? We say data column. Now remember, you can have more than one column to make up your primary key. So we're going to make that an array of keys equals new data column 1, and then key sub 0 equals new product dot columns sub 0, and then new product dot primary key equals keys, and then return new products. So whoever's going to call build table, I build a table, I add columns, I have my primary key, and then I return it. Let's finish up with the class process, our last method, load a file. So we're going to begin with our basic data structure, and we're going to call that dbs equals new, and then we're going to say data table dt equals dbs.buildDataTable, and we're going to be sending in a table name, and notice that table name will come from the parameter of load file. Now we have that, we're going to say data table product dt equals dbs.loadData, and we're going to send in the data structure of that table. Now you may have remember me saying that I have all the source code for this project up in my GitHub account. I recommend you go get that, but type this in so you can learn. Now this one method, load data, I'm only going to cut and paste in here. I'm not going to retype this, so you do the same from my GitHub account so you don't have to type in all that data. Let me press pause and get all that in there. So notice load data, I send in a data table, and I say data table new row, and then I'm going to say product ID is 212, the short description, this value, the product UPC is this value, and then I'm going to add that row to that data column. So data table row add. I'm going to keep repeating that all the way down until you get like 45 rows or so. Hope that makes sense. So get this from GitHub and then we can continue, and that is load data. Well, you just saw where I got all the data for load data. Make sure you go out to my GitHub account and download this project to your local computer. Now earlier we created a DB connection and you saw me build a connection string. So now we're going to actually use that here. We're going to say var dbcon equals dbconnect. And then whenever we do a connection, we have to close that and dispose it. So we're going to say dbcon.dispose, close, and then we're going to dispose that. Now that we have a connection, what we're going to do is we're going to use the SqlBulkCopy. Now, how does that work out? So let's understand what needs to be done first. Now, before you use SqlBulkCopy, your table has to exist. So if I come up here and I select column from there, I should get 0. Now, if I didn't run this command yet, it would come up and say undefined work product. So your table has to exist. Now, inside of the project, look for a SQL file and then just execute this on your database. After your database is open, then we can actually call SqlBulkCopy. So we'll say SQL bulk copy. I'm going to call that a BCP equals new SQL bulk copy, and it's got an input parameter of that connection string. Now I'm going to set up a couple values. BCP dot destination table. Well, that is the table that we just made in SQL Server, and that was called product work. And our next one is going to be the batch size. So when we create our data, notice here, I just gave you sample data. Sometimes I may take a file that's got 1 million rows, and I don't want to process 1 million rows at a time. Want to make a block size. So what we say is BCP dot batch size, and I'm going to say 20. Now, if I was doing 1 million, I would probably say like 20,000 or something like that. And then BCP dot timeout equals 10. Now what we're going to do is for each column that we have inside of our data structure, these three, I have to map them to the table that we just created. And this is a kind of easy command to do. We'll just say for each data column. So we say column in the name of this object here, dot columns. So it's going to, for each of the columns that are in this data table, I'm going to assign it to columns, and then quite simply we're going to do mapping based on the same name. So now if your table name and columns do not match, you're not going to be able to do this. You're going to have to do it a little different way. So you're going to have to map column to column. But since I'm the designer, I made my table and my object look the same. So we'll say bcp.column mapping, and then add. Then we're going to say column.column name and column.column name. Bring that down there so you can see that. Now, once we get our for each done, then we're going to do the big command, bcp.write.server. And what are we going to write to server? Well, we're going to do this object that we created earlier. It's called product DT, data table, right? And then we should have our close and dispose. And there we have it, team. A program that will take in just an object, a data table, and run it through bulk copy. Remember, bulk copy is when you have like a lot of data and we want to make a temporary table and load it into that temporary table and then write some sophisticated programs to go through there and make sure everything is fine. Now, do you need a work table? No. You can have this go directly to your production table and, just do it that way as well. That's some risk. Maybe when I was in my beginning programming experience, I did it that way. But as I grew more experience, I would always take it to a work table and then, use another store procedure to take it from work table to production table. And then if I made an error, I could roll back and the world will still save. And there you have it. Let's now run this program and see how it behaves. Okay, let's do this. Now, before we run our program, let's check our database. I'm going to say select count from work table, and notice there's 0. So there's no data in there. It's completely empty. After we get done running this program, we should have some data in there. Let's do this. Ready? I'm going to hit a F10 and start stepping my way through this. F10, F11 is going to step in there. I'm going to build that basic structure, build a table, add columns, and now I'm going to go get all that data. Now if I come up here and debug that, let me close this. Now if I come up here and say rows, notice I have some data. I have 44 rows of data in there. And now we're going to connect to our database. I'm now going to fire up BCP SqlBulkCopy. It's going to go to that work table. My batch size is 20. My timeout is 10. Let's do this. Ready? F10. Now I'm going to loop over each column. There should be 3, and I'm doing it this ways because the names are identical. Now if they were not the same, I could not do it this way. So 1, 2, 3. Now I've mapped the SQL bulk copy with my input data. They now look the same. F10. Now in one line of code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push all this data into the database. F10. I'm going to close, dispose, and we are all done. Now we're going to return to SQL Server. I'm going to get a count. Notice 44. And now when I say select star from product work table, notice we have all the data. And that wasn't too hard, but now you have learned how to take, could be a lot of data, and put it into a work table, and then use another SQL statement to take this work table and put it in your production table. That's all I have, team. Hope you enjoyed this video. And there you have it, team. SqlBulkCopy. Now, you heard me say I use a temporary table to load data from SqlBulkCopy. That is the way I do it. Now, I've loaded data thousands of times, and I've already made all the errors one can make. Doing it this way was safer for me. However, other programmers may do it different, and that's okay. I guess as long as you can successfully load data, life is good. Well, that's all I have. I appreciate your support. Take care.